ICQ Podcast Episode 305, Sherwood Engineering. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 305th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, supported this episode by Neil Connor, Mike 6, Charlie Uniform Echo, Frank Westpole, Kilo 6, Foxtrot Whiskey, and Charles Riley, Golf 4, Juliet, Quebec X-Ray, along with our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M0NJX is joined by Leslie, Golf 0, Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, Matthew, Mike 0, November Juliet X-Ray, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6, November Uniform, and Ruth, Kilo Mike 4, Lima Alpha Oscar, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature talking about Sherwood Engineering with Rob Sherwood. Well, so it's our donors that keep us advert free, and along with our annual and monthly subscription donors, we had Neil Connor, Mike 6, Charlie Uniform Echo, who says that unfortunately no message from Neil, but if you've got one, Neil, and you listen to this post show, feel free to pop one over to us and we'll quite happily read it out for you in a future show. We also got a donation from Frank, Kilo 6 Foxtrot Whiskey, who says enjoys the podcast very much and thanks for the show, so you're more than welcome. And Charles, G4 Juliet Quebec X-Ray, said he thought Frank K4 Foxtrot Mike Hotels interview with Howard Mickle was excellent. Frank has the ability to use his historical knowledge of amateur radio in a modern context to great effect in his questioning when talking to people about people and policies in order to move things forward. We all stand on the shoulders of amateurs that have gone before, and Frank is a great example of this. So Charles, many thanks for your feedback, and I'm sure Frank will be very happy to know you enjoyed his interview there with Howard Mickle. So you can help us keep us advert free on our show, just like the guys have done, along with the monthly and subscription donors. And you can do that by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you can send our way is always greatly appreciated. Now, talking about Frank, as I say, his Homebrew Hero Award that he's been working so hard on has received another corporate sponsor. So say we now have Bob Heil of Heil Sound, who has come on board as a corporate prize sponsor as well for the prize there. So it's certainly coming together nicely. Certainly a fine prize coming together there with the other sponsors. As I say, working away there, and as I say, I know the judging committee are doing their thing. Martin and I are extremely pleased to be helping Frank to promote the award, and as I say, certainly it's going to be coming to a head, I'm sure, very, very soon. Well, now let's move on with the show, and I'd like to you to listen out for Martin, Leslie, Edmund, Matthew, Dan and Ruth as they discuss the latest amateur radio news, including the ARRL HF Planning Committee is reactivated, and good news for the 2 Metre band. Hope you enjoy.
Whether it's across the pond or over the channel, the ICQ podcast is international.
Herzlich willkommen in Deutschland. 73 de España.
By amateurs, for amateurs.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 305 of the ICQ podcast. Tonight's news roundtable, we have Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB.
Good evening, Martin. Always great to be here, and thanks very much for the invite again.
No problems at all, and I'm sure you at some point in time will have a lot to say about the guys doing impersonations of you. Mind you, they were doing impersonations of me as well, so I think we're okay, Leslie. Also, we have Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hi, mate. Good to hear. We have Mr. Matthew M0NJX, and Matt and I were out all weekend playing radio, weren't we, Matt?
We were, and it's great to see you again and speak to you again, even if it's been only a couple of days. You know, there you go. Can't get enough.
Yeah, so that's good. Moving over to the other side of the pond, Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, is with us tonight. Hi, Dan.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, good to have you, Dan. And last but not least, and we mustn't forget her, we have Ruth Willet, KM4LAO. So, hi, Ruth.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be back.
It's good to have you back. And I know you contacted me in the week and said, hey, I missed a few shows because you've been putting a lot out. But, well, fortunately for our listeners, we had a lot of extra content that suddenly became very time sensitive, so we slipped another couple of episodes in, but we're back on the normal release schedule now, so everything should settle down at least for another week or so. Hi. And first news story, I kind of like this one, and I'm sure Dan will be blogging about this one quite heavily, but the ARRL HF Band Planning Committee has been reactivated. I think this is good, Dan. What do you think?
Oh yeah, no, I've already blogged about it actually, but yeah, I think this is great because we're just things are changing so fast that I think that this committee is going to have to be a continuous committee just so we can keep on top of these things.
Yeah, and it's worthwhile keeping an eye on things, as you say, because there are so many new things coming out. Ruth, have you any ideas or any thoughts on this one?
I think this is a great idea. I mean, like Dan said, it's important that we keep an eye on what modes we're using on different bands and where we're using them. So I think it's great that this committee's been reopened and that looking at spectrum issues is very important. I mean, we all have different things we enjoy in the hobby, and we want to be able to use the bands we have available as effectively as we can. So I'm very excited about this and hope that it continues open moving forward.
Yeah. And the other thing is that the ARRL have actually said that they're not here to shut down things like WingLink or some of the other digital modes. They're actually seriously looking at it and trying to harmonise it and all those sort of things. So that's really good. Matthew, although you sometimes get confused from somebody the other side of the pond, I know you were born in Wales, so what's your thoughts?
Well, God bless the Americans, right? I think it just shows that, I think as been discussed, the hobby changes, new technologies come in, and new modes get developed, and it shows the health of the hobby. We're not just static and HF is HF. There's all sorts of things going on and evolving. So I'm surprised it was actually a committee that was deactivated at some point. Does anyone know the history of why the committee was sort of shut down? Because they thought that was it, or what? Why did they need to reactivate it?
Dan, would you know?
I really don't know the history of it. I should have looked that up.
Shame on you.
I know. I'll take the blame for that one.
No, but it's great. I mean, I'd like to see. I guess this seems like a fairly proactive thing to do. So they clearly have an agenda. They want to talk about things. They want to get on to look at other digital modes. So let's see what comes out of it. How quickly do you think this committee forms opinions or gathers information?
Oh, well, knowing the ARRL, it'll be pretty glacial, but yeah, it'll be faster than in the past because things are changing too fast. Exactly. Cool.
Yeah, well, let's hope. As I say, I know things have changed quite a lot at the RSGB over the last few years, and with Howard Mickle now at the helm, we seem to be seeing lots of things happening at the ARRL that are coming forward. So that looks like a good news story. Leslie, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think it's the right thing to do because, like the people are saying, it's changing in technology, and we've got to be sensible how we use the bands. And some modes just aren't compatible with other modes. So you've got to have, this mode goes in this part of the band and that mode goes in that. And that changes with time. It's not fixed. You don't just write a piece of paper and it's there forever and a day. It's fluid. I agree with everything that's said. I can't really disagree, because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, there seems to be lots of nice things that are being done now in our hobby. And our hobby does seem to be moving forward, so very pleased about that. The one that got me, though, is the next news story, was causing problems with amateur radio and people televisions and things like that in in Iceland. My apologies, get it right, Martin, in Iceland. Matthew, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so, it's unusual to see a story from Iceland, such a small population, and I guess even smaller ham radio community, but they're very active in Europe. We can hear them on the bands. It looks like this is the actual details of the story are written in Icelandic, so Google is your friend, and we did a bit of translating. But essentially, it seems that one amateur had a station and was transmitting on 80 meters and 40 meters and was causing interference, as was claimed by another neighbor. And this interference was affecting their TV reception and VDSL packets. So the PTA, which is the Postal and Telecommunications Administration, which is sort of like the Ofcom or FCC equivalent in Iceland, which monitors communications in Iceland, did some analysis. And in June, they went to the ham station's house and did some tests. And indeed, they found that 100 watts output, they were interfering with the neighbor. The 20 watt output was not interfering. So they basically identified that it was the ham station that was causing the interference, and they required him to cease and desist transmissions until a suitable problem could be, a solution could be found to resolve the problem. So, of course, it's a little frustrating to hear a ham being curtailed or controlled in some sense or shut down in this example. But it seems that, and again, we don't know the details of how close the transmitter was to the house and all that kind of stuff, all the important details. But it was found that the station was interfering locally with neighbors and was asked to stop. So that's essentially what the finding is at the moment. I haven't seen any further developments as to what's been the fix or where it might go in the future.
Yeah, but the thing that gets me is 40 metres and 80 metres are amateur radio bands. He must have been transmitting on those bands for years. People tend to buy electronics products based on their cheapness. And we know that a lot of electronics goods are downgraded once they've got their registration sticker. So you could have a situation where if his signal's clean, then he shouldn't be interfering at 80 metres and 40 metres, because even if he was the VHF bands, even if he's on the VHF bands, that would then be up at the 50 megs was the lowest that the tellies would be. So I find that quite strange, unless it's interference to the internet connection, isn't it? Which is the problem. And the internet didn't exist 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, so it may be the neighbor got a new installation and found that was a problem.
Yeah.
Because before the installation, the ham was transmitting quite happily. We don't know the proximity of the antenna to the neighbor. Maybe there were adjacent walls or something. You can imagine 100 watts into anything electrical nearby can cause problems if that's if it's close to where things can resonate and interfere. So unfortunately, we don't have all the details. But in this case, the amateur is being asked to switch off their station while I guess either filters are applied or some agreement can be made to rectify it.
Yeah. Ruth, do you have any thoughts on this one? I mean, you wouldn't want to be shut down, would you?
No, it wouldn't be much fun to be shut down. I'll be honest, I don't know too much about this story, and I've been really enjoying listening to you all talking about it and getting your perspective from that part of the world. But yeah, it's definitely a interesting one, and we don't really know the whole story, and I definitely agree. Maybe something happened where the neighbor upgraded, and now all of a sudden things are interfering. In reading it, I read that there seemed to be decent communication, hopefully, between the PTA and the ham radio operators. So hopefully they can all work together to ensure that interference isn't done either way. And I sure hope that the analysis is done both for the hams as well as the neighbor to try to make sure that his equipment is working properly so that we can get this ham back on the air, but also not offending all of his neighbors in the process.
Yeah, that's good. I agree on that one. Moving on to Leslie. Go on, Leslie. You throw the hand grenade in the room.
Are you saying I'm... What are you saying, Martin?
I'm saying that you probably may take a different point from us.
No, not really. What it is the analogy I would use is, imagine you've got a hole in your roof and it's raining and the rain comes into your house and then you blame the rain. It's not the rain's fault. The problem is that you've got a hole in your roof. And that's the same analogy. The reason this is occurring is because of the filtering on the equipment the other end. The other thing is, it used to be a book by the RSGB many, many years ago that it was to do with the EMC issues. And it was a very, very good book. It went into all these types of things. And 95% of the issues aren't really technical. It's how you deal with people and how you deal with your neighbours. And it's actually approaching this technical problem in the correct way before it even gets to Ofcom or the national body or, the regulated body or anything like that. That's the key to these things. And, 100 watts isn't very much. And if he was running a kilowatt, I'd say, tone it down a bit, turn the wick down. But 100 watts, I think most equipment should be able to stand that very, very easily. So I don't think this is as clear cut. It obviously depends upon the circumstances, which is a little bit sketchy. But I would say that 100 watts isn't very much, and the equipment should be able to take it quite easily if there's correct filtering.
Yeah, you talk about filtering very quickly. I got to know an old boy, a G3, in the last years of his life. It's unfortunately been a silent key for some time now. But when he died, his next door neighbours said to me, "Martin, can you come and take all the stuff he's left in our house?" And I went into their house, and just about every piece of equipment had a filter on it. And this was quite strange because this was the guy that used to go out and bust people for causing interference. And he had masses of filters all over his neighbour's gear. It's all about good radio housekeeping.
Yeah. You get that right, you got half a chance.
You have. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, to me, it seems like the PTA decision here was a little bit rash without doing more testing and doing more experiments to see if the interference could be mitigated. Here in the U.S., right, we have lots of, resources that maybe they don't have in Iceland. And, I guess one of my feelings is I'm glad I've never had that kind of problem here, right? Because I really would hate to, I don't even know if I have the technical expertise to troubleshoot and then fix such a problem. I mean, we all say filters and all that stuff, and yeah, that might work, but never having had to do it, I don't know that I would be able to, actually troubleshoot and fix a problem and keep on the good side of my neighbors. So I'm just glad I don't have that problem here.
Yeah, it can be a problem. I know Chris Howard had to go and fit filters to his neighbours' computer speakers, but they're so badly manufactured these days. My computer speakers are above my desk here. If I transmit with a handy-talkie within 3 feet of them, they have suffer interference. So there's bad design in electronic equipment as well. Edmund, you got anything to say on this one?
Well, I'm lucky because, to the best of my knowledge, I've never caused interference to any of my neighbours. But having said that, normally I only run at 20 or 25 watts the whole time, unless it's a really marginal contact, in which case I'll go up to 50 watts in anger if I really have to. And it's incredibly unusual for me to use anything more than 50. So going from 100 to 20 is not ideal, but it's considerably better than going down to 0. If my neighbour complained that I was causing interference, even if I knew for a fact that my station was as technically as good as it could be and beyond reproach in every respect, and I knew for a fact that the breakthrough problem was caused wholly and exclusively by his equipment or her equipment lacking in immunity, even then I would switch off or turn the power right down until it was solved, because I think good neighbourly relations trump everything, including an amateur's right to go on the air and use 100 watts.
Yeah,
So,
you have to be very diplomatic about it and do it in the right way.
Absolutely, Leslie. So I hope the compromise will win out, and if they can get some filters in the right places, then hopefully he can go back to 100 watts, or he could discover the delights of QRP.
Well, there's saying something, isn't it? Yeah, that'll start another argument, mate. Anyway, that's good.
Discuss.
Yeah, oh dear. No, don't get me on that one. Moving on to our next story. Ham radio tracks interference signal, and this is an ARRL report of a interference on a marine band. Let's let Ruth go first on this one. You haven't been first on any, so over to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much. I loved reading this story, honestly. It just makes me happy when amateur radio operators can use our skills to help others, especially commercial and military radio situations. I'm happy, based on the report, that hams in Washington were able to adequately, usefully help find this offending signal. It seemed like pretty quickly, and get things back on the air, and so that this channel could be used for communication. Definitely a good showing for amateur radio, and hopefully get some good connections in place in case they need to use it again in the future. So very happy to read this, and good news for sure.
Yeah, good publicity all round on that one. Edmund, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's good news, and a quick win, as they would say at work, for amateur radio, because getting involved in direction finding an offending signal like this is potentially quite easy to do, unless it's on high ground knocking out a lot of power. And it fosters goodwill, and of course the next time it could be something interfering in the amateur radio band. So yeah, a good news story.
Yeah, I liked it as well. I'm guessing from what I read that the trawler or the boat probably left its transmitter in transmit, and or the transmit switch was thrown, and they'd just gone home and caused it. Dan, did you blog about this one, or is this one not something you were blogged about?
I did not, and this is news to me, but it sounds to me like this is a fulfillment of our public service purpose. At least that's what we have here in our rules, providing public service. And I think this also points to this being a skill that probably more clubs should promote. I know we don't really do a good job here, to be honest, here in Ann Arbor, but maybe we should start thinking about this just in case we're called upon in some capacity.
Yeah, I think it's a skill that we know the technicals of it, but we don't practice. But this group have done a couple, I believe, over the last few years. So that's a good one. Matt, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I guess I'm spotting a pattern. If I go back to the last podcast I was on 4 weeks ago, there was a similar story in, I think it was New Zealand, and there was a transponder an emergency transponder that would set off, and the emergency services had asked the local amateur club or society to help out and triangulate and locate it and so forth. And it's great that the services, the official emergency services, can reach out to the amateur community. In this case, it was actually the Emergency Communications Club. So I clearly they probably had a closer relationship with official emergency, in this case, it was the U.S. Coast Guard services. But it seems that where there's a need to help resolve radio-related issues, you go to the experts, right? You ask the radio guys. So it's really nice to see, in another part of the world, basically the other side of the world, the same kind of ethos of, as Dan says, helping public service, helping out, trying to clean the airwaves, trying to resolve any issues that might be out there. So well done.
Yeah, and the other thing is that in many ways, sometimes if you've got to do it the official way and you've got to mobilise the official people to do it, this takes time. and there's a fairly good chance, most us amateurs, any chance to play radio and we're straight there. So I think it's possibly a matter of it got done a lot quicker because amateurs were involved. Leslie, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about everybody's comments, about the public service comments. This is a good show. This is the stuff we can do, and it brings a hobby up, and it gives it's a really good story, and it puts amateur radio in good light. Good show, I say.
Spot on, absolutely spot on. So that's good. Well, I think our next news story has been the one that, although the ICQ podcast hasn't run it too much, purely because, in fairness, I thought this was a bit sabre wavering. But in fairness, it looks like the French have dropped their petition to try and grab the 2 metre band. So, I think it was a bit of negotiation going on. I didn't ever see it happening, but it's nice for it not to happen. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Why have you come to me first, I wonder? Yeah, I'm very pleased to hear this news. And like you, Martin, realistically, I didn't see this being a runner. There was a very big tropospheric opening a couple of weeks back, and I went up on high ground and tuned across from 144 to 146 megs. And every mode you could think of was in use: CW, SSB, FT8, slow scan TV, FM, repeaters, satellites, you name it. It was on the band somewhere. So fitting in other non-amateur signals, I really didn't think was ever going to happen. So great news that this has now come to pass. Decision. Only 2 comments. Number 1, whichever your band of choice is, use it or lose it. And number 2, even though 2 meters is safe and 70 centimeters is probably reasonably safe in the UK because the MOD is the primary user. So amateurs, rather than businesses or commercial interests sharing the band, they act as good sort of placeholders almost for the MOD. But above that, 23 SEMs and higher, those bands potentially are also very much at risk. So now that 2 meters is safe, maybe we should collectively turn our attention to trying to safeguard the microwave bands. Martin, back to you.
Yeah, there's always going to be things we have to safeguard, and all the bands are important to us. But I'm really pleased that this 2 metre thing didn't happen, because although it was a kind of a European thing, it may very well have kicked over to your side of the pond, Dan. There was a potential for it, so I bet you're pleased as well, aren't you?
Oh yeah, you never know what kind of precedent can be set there, and I think my feelings echo yours almost exactly. You didn't, I couldn't actually see it happening, but I'm glad it's not going to. Definitely not now. So, yeah, that's just one of those things.
It certainly is, and I'm going to throw an extra one in here, which is totally off the wall. Dan doesn't only do CW, by the way, because I worked him the other week on DMR voice, didn't I, Dan?
Yeah. I'm sorry I wasn't able to continue that conversation, but try me again sometime.
Will do. Ruth, I bet you're glad that they didn't kill off the 2. Well, if it had happened, it would have probably rippled all around the world, and that would have given you major problems, wouldn't it?
Most definitely. I'm very glad that none of our amateur radio bandwidth has been killed off. Like others have said, I didn't entirely think anything was actually going to happen in terms of losing any bandwidth, but it's important that we make sure that we actually don't lose anything, because if we get complacent about it, then that's when we're going to lose something. So I definitely think that this is a reminder to make sure, we have a strong case to keep our frequencies by, keeping bands like 2 meters and higher as active as we can, keep using them to have fun, experiment, and just enjoy the hobby to its fullest so that we can have an opportunity to use all the bands we have available and keep them that way.
Yeah, and people say, oh, there's no activity on this band or no activity on that band. I've said many times, if two of us were to have a conversation on the calling frequency, 2 metre calling frequency in London, within 2 overs, half of London will wake up and tell us to get off the calling frequency. But you wouldn't have heard anybody talking on 2 metres the whole of the time. There's a lot of people out there listening. Matt, what's your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I was sitting on the sidelines watching it. I'm not a big VHF user, but yeah, I mean, to have the headline that 2 meters could be part of the conversation at work focuses the mind, right? It gets people talking, whether or not it's a real chance of happening or whether or not, there's other stuff going on in the background. As Ruth said, you get to kind of realize that whatever permissions we have to whatever spectrum rights we have as primary users, they're only as good as the authorities that let us have them. And we have to show that the privilege of using that spectrum is not wasted on us. So we should use it. Absolutely. So let's be thankful this is not going to work 23, and that we should maybe just pick up that handy and maybe just have a few more QSOs and make use of the privilege that we have.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I was talking to a youngster earlier over the weekend who was saying that it's far more exciting for young people to actually, when they realise we're off the grid. And I know we were doing SSB Field Day, but people have got used to mobile phones now. But when they work out the actual of what you're actually doing, and even on 2 meters, there's a lot going on that's very, very interesting. So, good one. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Oh, you're trying to get me on my soapbox again, Martin. The thing is that, like UHF, there's a strong commercial interest, and spectrum is becoming big money. And so it's down to us radio amateurs to use the band. If we don't use it, we're going to lose it. And yeah, we got to use the national societies to, shall we say, argue our corner. And if the government governments or authorities see the bands aren't being used, they go, oh, thank you very much. So that's what we've got to do. It's down to us. And we've got to give our national societies the ammunition, if you like, to sort of say, yes, these bands are being used. But that's my take on it. But there you go. I'm glad it's all been sorted.
So am I. That's a good one, and I think we can all sleep tonight. Last news story. Dan slipped this one in about half an hour ago. It was a good one, Dan. You spotted that the deal's been done for another 5 years at Hamvention, hasn't it? Over to you, Dan.
Yep. 5 more years in Xenia. And I would suspect many more, given the history with Hero Arena. And I think the key line here is in the press release. It says the decision will enable the county to make additional enhancements to the facility. And it was already talked about once that they were going to build a new building, and then they sort of backed out on that for whatever reason. But it is certainly a better venue than Hero was, but it does need some improvements. The tents, I think, are kind of abysmal. If I was paying big money to be in the tent, I would be kind of upset about that. And the flea market, even though the asphalt pathways are an improvement, something else could be done to make that better. Last year, we were very fortunate. It didn't rain a lot, but if it had rained a lot, then it would have been still kind of muddy out there. So overall, I think it's a good thing. I did have one comment, though, on my blog about this. I just read it because I think it's funny. The guy says, except for the muddy flea market area, the exhibit buildings and tents that are better suited for livestock, the muddy parking area, and the clogged roads used to access the site, Xenia is a perfect location for Hamvention. So we're not everyone's excited about it.
No. In fairness, and 4 out of the 6 presenters on tonight have been to Xenia, and It is a nice. I enjoyed it. Let's be honest, I enjoyed it. It is absolutely massive, and I can imagine if it rained a lot, you could have your cars bogged in because you park on the grass. And I agree with what you're saying, but I was very, very impressed with it, Dan. And I assume that by bringing more money in, they will be able to invest, because, I mean, that must be one of the biggest shows that you're going to get there, I would have thought.
Well, so that's another thing that's in the press release is the attendance for 2019 was something like 32,400 and change.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's a pretty good attendance, and word will get around, and even more people will start coming. So all that's good.
Yeah, well, one day we might even get Leslie across the pond. You never know.
It's on my list, The only trouble is, my credit card is zero. I'm afraid if I go to one of those places, it won't be. And how do I get the stuff home?
What you do, mate, is you do what we did. You go hand luggage only, live out of a rucksack, and then you know that you can't bring stuff back. You just go for the enjoyment and the social, and you'll just get blown away, mate.
Yeah, even if you don't buy anything, it's a blast.
Yeah. I was dead on that. Edmund, you were there. What did you think of the improvements in the ground and that?
Well, I never experienced. Is it Harrow or Hara Arena?
We all say Hara.
Harrow Arena, the place where it used to be, and I think they might have had hard parking there or concreted car parks. But Hamvention in Xenia this year, that's the first time I've ever been to Hamvention. I've never experienced anything quite like it on the scale. I was absolutely blown away. And sure, wherever you have an event like that, there will always be some things that will not satisfy some people. I mean, you could hold that event pretty much anywhere in the USA or the UK, and with that number of people descending on that area, you're going to have traffic jams in the local area. You could park the cars on any field, anywhere, and if it rained, you would still have a quagmire. So it just so blew my mind that things like that, to me, sound and feel like trivialities, really. Okay, I might have a very different point of view if it had been my car that had disappeared half underground because the grass had turned into
It's not a car, it's a submarine.
It's not a car, it's a submarine. But if anybody's listening to this and is thinking about going to Hamvention for the first time, all of those things that could potentially go wrong. I mean, as it is, I went the other way and got slightly sunburnt rather than soaked and rained on. So it's never going to be perfect. But don't let considerations like that put you off. I cannot recommend that event highly enough. And if my employer saw fit to pay me a few more pennies now and again, I would come every year without a hesitation of a doubt.
Yeah, we had great fun. Ruth, you were there. We didn't actually meet up with you, unfortunately, at the time, but I know you were there. What do you think of the venue and the potential improvements?
Oh, definitely. Yes, I was there. I've been to Hamvention the last 4 years. Yeah, my first year, I got to experience Hera, and then ever since then, I've been in Xenia. I'm happy that the Greene County Expo is going to be hosting Hamvention for the next 5 years. Having been there, it's definitely a step up. Like others have said, there's certainly improvements to be made, but even the last couple of years, I've seen things get better as I've gone each year. I'm very encouraged that they're going to be working on enhancements, which is very important to keep, with that many people coming, it's important that we can all use it pretty easily. But also with that many people, there's going to be mud. It's probably going to rain every weekend because it's Hamvention, all that good stuff. But overall, I'm very happy that they're going to be there the next 5 years, and it's definitely nice to know where to make plans for hotels and where we're going to be heading, what to expect for the next couple of years at that expo center. So I'm happy about the news.
Yeah, that's good. And From our point of view, Ruth, it didn't really matter, because if it had got muddy and our car would have got extremely filthy, it was a hire car and I wasn't going to have to wash it. But there you go. Matt, you didn't make it out there this time. Maybe you'll make it out with us at another time. You missed a great trip.
Yeah, clearly, given the response that you guys are effusing about the show, that's I clearly have missed a trick. In Europe, locally in London, I love to go to the local bazaars and the local fairs. The kind of the flea market things that go on in the ham radio space. Local was the one at Kempton Park, the West London thing, local club events. And I just love trawling through other people's stuff and trying to find a bargain and trying to find a new thing. And in Europe, of course, there's Friedrichshafen. You guys know what I mean. And in Switzerland, right? Switzerland, yeah, Switzerland. And that's
Germany.
The next step for me is to make an international trip to an event and just kind of stumble around and look at all the great stuff. But finding my way to the States, as strange as I might sound, as if I am from the States, but it would be another journey as well, and kind of another level up. So it's on my bucket list, I think, and it's just finding the time in my calendar, my personal calendar, to make the most of it. So it's a 3-day event. I mean, I struggled even to go to the UK thing in Newark. God, the name escapes me now. What's the one in Newark?
Hamfest in Newark, a couple of weeks' time.
And so I may be perhaps making excuses, but I will have to carve out some time in some year and just say, I'm here, I'm going, there you are. So thanks for infusing me.
Right. Well, I'll tell you this, and it's going off a little bit of a tangent, Matthew. But if you do go to Friedrichshafen, and Chris was talking about driving again the other week, rule number 1, Chris Howard should be blindfolded, gagged, tied up, drugged, and put in the boot. Especially if you're driving his car, because he is absolutely terrified. He's probably the worst passenger ever. I mean, Chris, and I'm not saying anything on here that I wouldn't say to Chris's face. He really does worry, you know. I now don't want to drive Chris because he's such a bad passenger, especially when I'm driving his car.
His big Volvo estate car. It's a massive thing, right? Is that the one?
I drove his previous Volvo down to Friedrichshafen and part of the way back, part of the way there and part of the way back. And I drove in the States, but Chris is not a good passenger in a car, and even worse if it's his own car.
So I technically have a car license, though I haven't driven since probably 2016. I'm not a big fan of driving cars. I have a motorcycle, but not a car driver. So I will fully volunteer to refresh my skills with cars, with Chris's car, should the opportunity arise. I'll put the offer out there.
Right. Well, I'll leave you to talk to Chris. Sorry, Chris. You know we're going to rag you over it, but I say Chris is a great driver, but he's a bad passenger. Never mind. Okay, well, that then concludes the news stories. And all that's now need to be done is to find out what you guys have been up to in the since the last program. I'm going to go with Ruth because you're on a hard stop. Ruth, what have you been up to in the last 4 weeks, amateur radio-wise?
I've been staying busy, doing a lot of satellites, of course. Back at the end of August, I roved to a rare grid in South Carolina, which was fun. I got to operate as Whiskey 3 Zulu Mike Stroke 4, which is helping celebrate the AMSAT 50th anniversary, which was a lot of fun. Got to put South Carolina on the air for the first time as Whiskey 3 Zulu Mike Stroke 4, but also there aren't very many satellite operators in South Carolina, so got to get a lot of people to grid, so that was very fun. Also been enjoying a fair amount of HF. I've been swapping out my antennas at the place where I live during my co-op job because I just put a temporary dipole up while I'm here for 3 months. But got a better antenna up that's working a little better, so I've been having fun, worked some stations during the ARRL Hiram Percy Maxim birthday celebration, and also chasing some of the Route 66 on the air stations. So I'm having fun, enjoying my free time in the evenings, to do ham radio now that because I'm still in co-op and enjoying that before I head back to school in October.
Yeah, but a little bird also told me you was at Hamfest and you met another ICQ presenter, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I was at Huntsville Hamfest. That was a little while ago, so yes, but that was awesome. First time I'd been to Huntsville in 3 or 4 years, so second time total. Love the Hamfest. It's a lot of fun. It's a good size to get to see people. But yes, I ran into Frank at one of the booths. We had a wonderful time talking. So great getting to meet him and get to meet some of the presenters on the other podcasts, the other side of presenters that I haven't met on the air yet for this. And very enjoyable getting to talk with him and learn from him. And, he's been on longer than I have. So all the advice I got from him about doing the podcast and whatnot. And also enjoyed talking with him because academically I'm a student and he was a professor and all that. So definitely enjoyed getting to meet him and looking forward to when I can meet the rest of you all, hopefully in the future.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that, and hopefully we will be over within the next couple of years at least. I think 2021 is when I'm hoping to get over to Hamfest, but Hamvention rather. That's my one. Dan, what have you been up to apart from working me on DMR?
Well, speaking of DMR, so I have another book in the works, actually, and it's on DMR. And I'm not actually writing this book, but someone else is the author, and I'm going to produce it under my quote-unquote publishing company. And so look for that real soon. And I mean real soon. So that should be out soon. And it'll be for people, for beginners, for anybody, actually. And I'm actually kind of surprised there isn't already a book out on like this one, but there really isn't. And every time I would send a shipment of study guides to Gigaparts, they were always asking me when the DMR book's going to be ready. Well, now I can finally tell them that it is going to be ready. And aside from ham radio, I think we all have other hobbies too. The bowling season has started, and I've started bowling again. And I've actually done pretty well the first week, so I'm looking forward to a good bowling season.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good, Dan. And the DMR book certainly sounds good. I've spent a fair bit of time trying to sort some DMR stuff out from one of the guys, and then got even deeper into it, and I've kind of got my head around it now again. So the biggest problem with the DMR stuff is that a lot of the stuff on the internet is wrong, and if you guys have written a book, then hopefully that's going to be the definitive way to go. So looking forward to that one, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Matthew, what have you been up to?
Well, funny you should ask. This weekend past, so 3-4 days ago, participated in the SSB field day with our club Sutton and Cheam, and went down to Red Hill Aerodrome, which is in South London area, and had a fantastic day. 24-hour operation of the station. We operated Golf 2 X-Ray Papa Portable. And it was a beautiful. We were very lucky with the weather. It was a beautiful weekend. Camping, operating all times of the day. It was wonderful. So I really enjoyed that. Getting back into HF, we were using 20, 40, 80 meters mainly for our station and our situation. What else? A little closer to home, I've been spending a lot of time listening to Web SDR, which is an online SDR thing from Twente University in Holland, listening to 40 meters CW, trying to get my ear in, and I can just hear Dan saying, "Get on the air," get on the air, Dan, right? That's best way to learn and best way to practice.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get my hand into CW again. As sort of tied into that, I actually repaired a small keyer that I picked up at one of these flea markets. Must have been, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 months ago. A little iambic keyer with. I opened it up. The guy sold it to me and said it's not working perfectly. Whatever. I opened it up. Tiny little thing. It's got a Curtis keyer chip, the 8044 chip. So it probably comes out of the late 70s, early 80s, or something like that. and had a poke and a prod and a little bit of a soldering touch-up, and it's working nicely. So I had a little bit of play with that. And just before the recording today, I had a conversation with my landlady. Very important. I promised her flowers and chocolates, but she's okay to letting me put up an off-center fed dipole in my my new QTH here. So hopefully I'll be experimenting with a couple of balance and a few lengths and dimensions. I probably got about 18 meters to play with to try and fit something in, maybe for 40 meters or 20 meters. So yeah, looking up in the HF world for me.
Right, that sounds good. Sounds like you've been very busy. Edmund, what have you been up to since our last chat?
Not a great deal, really. The International Lighthouse weekend came and went on the third weekend in August. And usually at Shoreham Lighthouse, it's a very smooth running event. Nothing goes wrong, or nothing major goes wrong. This time we had high winds, a snapped antenna, intermittently high SWR, all kinds of things to overcome. So that was a bit of a shock to the system because, as I say, normally it's such a smooth running event. Since then, there's not really been an awful lot else on. Oh, there was good tropospheric conditions a couple of weeks back. Don't forget, look out for misty mornings or evenings and rapidly falling high pressure. And you'll often find lift conditions on 2 meters if those things happen. And I managed to get from sea level at East Preston Beach using 0.5 watt FM. I managed to work a station just south of Cherbourg in France. That wasn't on 70 centimeters though. That was on the license-free 446 band. My equipment was legal. I suspect the chap at the other end was possibly using Yagis and more than 0.5 watt. So he was perhaps not operating quite as legally as he might have been. But nevertheless, it was okay at my end. And of course, those frequencies are just next door to the 70 centimeter band in the UK. So if conditions are good, have a go. That's another great underrated amateur radio band. So I would encourage people to have a go on there as well as 2 meters. Other than that, I'm really just starting to look forward to the National Hamfest at Newark at the end of September. At the moment, most of the radio I'm doing is listening to broadcast radio because I was a broadcast radio listener since the early 90s, whereas I only got my foundation license in 2009. And that's all bands. Long wave through to shortwave and FM and DAB. And at the moment in the UK, there is, shall we say, news going on. So I'm listening to Radio 4 rather a lot. Viewers, listeners in the UK will know what that is for things like The World Tonight and Yesterday in Parliament and documentaries on how to feel depressed about events that are happening nationally. So doing that mostly, but looking forward to the Newark Hamfest at the end of September.
Yeah, you're dead right. We'll be there in about 2 weeks' time. Well, when this goes out anyway, it'll be about 2 weeks' time. Leslie, what have you been up to amateur radio-wise? I didn't hear you on SSB Field Day or Silverthorne Radio Club on SSB Field Day, but what have you been up to?
We was on HF. We did a little bit on UHF. However, that was successful, the HF side. UHF was, pretty much sort of the talking side on OY. But one thing we did do was of note, and people may be interested in this. I had my suspicions about some of the cables we were using. So yeah, the HF was working like I said, and I thought, okay, well, how do I check these cables? Coax cables, of course. And I looked on the University of YouTube, as you do, and I found a really good video by a guy called Kevin, N6VLF, on how to measure coaxial losses. And I went through that, and the first time did some of the calculations, and I must admit, the first time it was scrambled eggs, because the last time I'd done log calculations was about 30 years ago. So anyway, after a while, there's certain ratios that sort of stick in your mind. So I thought I'd keep turning the handle till I get those right, and then at least I've got the method right. And yeah, that was right. And I did manage to find one cable that was totally duff, and I was pleased about that. I've still got some more to test. But yeah, it was an interesting, trying to relearn stuff that I'd learned years ago and forgotten at the time. But that was a very, very interesting exercise, and it was a very worthwhile video.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Right, what have I been up to? Well, I've got a new job, but unfortunately it means I've got to work. Hi. But looking forward to it. It's a bit of interaction with the public, and I'm quite enjoying that. Been making a fair number of DMR contacts. It's been bugging me a little bit. And I mentioned last time Adrian M0GLJ sent me a hotspot board to go on top of a Raspberry Pi. Got that working, been doing a lot with that, and was on the Cypress net earlier this week via the hotspot, obviously, because I don't want to tie up a repeater around here. So we made contacts through the Cypress group. Chris Howard bought one of these little boards, and then he decided he wanted the display. So he bought a number of displays and decided to give me one so I could work it out how it all went together and connected, and the software, which I've done. So I can now do Chris's in about 5 minutes. Took me a little bit longer for mine. SSB field day, as we said, Matthew and I were there. Not a lot of UK stations on, phenomenal amount for East European stations, but pretty much hardly any UK stations at all. We just didn't hear them. So that was good. I've got a booking for review. Won't tell you too much about that, but a gentleman sent me a booking for review, which I'm going to do over the next few weeks. So that's looking quite an interesting book. And Chris and I did a talk on ICQ going to Hamvention last week, which was received really good. And all in all, apart from that, my friend Richard and Christine went back to Cyprus after we had a very pleasant afternoon. So hopefully I'll be keeping in touch with Richard now on the DMR net. So been pretty busy, like all of you. And it's going to be interesting with work over the next few weeks, because I've got me a fairly full diary, and work's just gone in on top of it, and looks like I haven't got any free dates. It's almost till the middle of October, but we'll see what we can do. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me tonight, and great fun. Ruth's had to leave us because she's on a hard stop, but thanks to Ruth, KM4 LAO. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB.
It's a blast, Martin, as usual. It's thanks for inviting me.
You're always invited, mate. You're okay. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Great fun as always, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Matthew Nassau M0NJX.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you back, and I know we all had a little bit of hiatus, but it's great to have you back with us. And last but not least, Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU. Great to have you, Dan. You always bring a lot to the show.
Well, I always look forward to it. 7-3s, guys.
Yeah. Well, I say 7-3 all. This is not the end of the podcast. It's just the end of this section. 7-3s, guys.
Cheerio.
7-3.
7-3.
Hi, Mrs. B here. The guys thank you very much for your downloads. However, there are a few things that would help the ICQ podcast to continue to grow. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We need you, and it's free. 73's Mrs. B.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. In the month of October is the 100th year of Scouting at Gilwell Park in North London, and the Scouts UK headquarters station, GB2GB, will be active using the special event call sign GB100GB to celebrate the 100 years of Scouting. This will be used particularly during Jamboree on the Air, which takes place on the third weekend of October between the 19th and the 20th of October. The radio station will include HF operations, focusing on putting Scouts on the microphone in direct contact with other Scouts around the world. The station is able to run 3 full power stations simultaneously, and we centered around the Scout recognised frequencies of 3.69, 7.190, 14.290, 18.140, 21.360 and 28.390 MHz. In addition, they'll be using digital modes, FT8, PSK and RTTY as well on the HF bands. So lots of information here and loads of links to find out more information, which will obviously pop on icqpodcast.com for you. Great news here, a Whisper Piccolo balloon on 14.0958 upper sideband released at the end of August is about to complete its first circumnavigation of the globe after travelling 33,000 kilometres in 12 days. AMSAT-LU appreciates any Whisper stations that receive it to pass on their information, and they'll recognise it with a certificate for a station that captures its 25 milliwatt beacon. So we've got a link to a trajectory that will be running for you, and say if you catch a link on it there, the guys at AMSAT would love to hear from you. And I found this last news story just an interesting one because it was a weird part of the world we don't go to at all very often. In North Korea, they've been testing DMR on the amateur bands. So the latest DMR shortwave transmissions began around about mid-August, and they've been periodically testing this over the last few years. It appears unclear at this time, however, whether or not the current series of transmissions will soon end or be the start of a regular service. Thus far, all the tested transmissions have taken place on 3560 kHz, which is actually allocated for amateur radio use. According to radio enthusiasts in the region, the signal has been clear and very audible. So interesting, a bit of radio news there coming out of North Korea. Well, now we're going to head over to our features episode, which is our feature talking to Rob Sherwood of Sherwood Engineering. Hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Frank, K4FMH, Fox Mike Hotel, with another feature interview segment for the ICQ podcast. My guest in this interview would be a contestant on Dancing with the Stars Amateur Radio Edition. But that tells almost no hams who I have today as my guest. But even if you were living in a cave, at some point, archaeologists would find cave drawings of the Sherwood receiver table. And yes, Rob Sherwood, November Charlie, 0 Bravo, is my guest today. Welcome, Rob.
Good morning, Frank.
Glad to have you here with us. You are one of the most requested interviewees for the ICQ podcast, and so we're delighted to have folks here in the States and those across the pond where we have a very significant audience and really around the world join us here today as we talk about what you do. Certainly your calling card is the Sherwood tables. Now, I mentioned that you might be on Dancing with the Stars Amateur Radio Edition. You are a practicer of the art of ballroom dancing, I understand.
Well, it is. It's a certain type of ballroom dancing called choreographed ballroom. So everyone in the room is doing the same ballroom steps at the same time, to kind of like a caller for square dancing. So it's kind of a niche hobby, but we enjoy it.
And it strikes me that that requires a certain coordination of precision, not unlike a contemporary transceiver.
Well, I think an engineer can dance. He just has to learn the terms.
Very good. Well, that's something that I always try to find out something about a guest that maybe very few people know, and it tends to illuminate who they are and the passions outside of amateur radio. Tell me a little bit about how you're from the Cincinnati area, from your QRZ bio. How did you fall in love with engineering, or was that a sudden thing or just a gradual process?
Well, I grew up in Cincinnati. Once I was 14 years old. So, but engineering kind of came by secondhand. I mean, I went to college and then moved to Denver and started working for KOA Radio, the 50 kilowatt station on 850 kilohertz. And so I was sort of a pseudo engineer. My degree's in physics.
I say, where did you go to college?
Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana.
Physics is just such a great training for preparation for electrical engineering for more or less obvious reasons of those who are electrical engineers, because so much of it today is about the physics of conductors and semiconductors and all the kind of things that we're doing and fooling with. Hey, let's try to light to send radio waves on instead of RF.
Well, when I was in high school, we actually had an early laser, and we managed to transmit voice across the stage and demonstrated audio across light waves. So that was kind of fun.
Absolutely. And of course, today, that's what some of the experimental work is, transmission of communications information. So you sort of might be like the E.T. movie where one of the characters is making a mountain out of mashed potatoes or something. You grew up at WLW and then you wound up being at KOA. So, you kind of had the big transmitters in your bloodstream at that point.
And there was a time when KOA and WLW had the same continental transmitters, so that was kind of fun too. You
moved out to Colorado. How did you decide to leave KOA and sort of start your own firm?
Well, that was kind of a fluke, and actually I went from KOA to IT. So when I finally did leave KOA after 18 years, and then I took care of an FM station that built new studios for a couple of years at a jazz station in Denver. But I went into IT, and so I've been self-employed for about 33 years.
What was the era of IT that you were doing at that point?
Well, I still am to a limited extent, although I'm sort of semi-retired. But companies that are small enough, they can't afford a full-time IT person. So I would be typically a company that had 10 to 25 employees, and so it had to make their network work.
And folks who do IT know that now things are organized around production functions. That is what a company does. You've got to have the network. Sneakernet doesn't happen anymore.
And if your email goes down for 5 minutes, they have a fit.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, I have a background in IT in universities and have, as I've said to too many people too many times, I spent half my life crawling around under tables, hooking up wires.
And banging your head a couple times.
We're talking with Rob Sherwood, November Charlie 0 Bravo, creator of the famous Sherwood tables. You see, you created Sherwood Engineering, and I'll give full disclosure, I am at least a former customer of Sherwood Engineering. I had the pleasure of buying a Japan radio, NRD 545, and you did a filter mod for me. And that is the single radio that I let get away because I got in the mood of, well, I've got this nice Perseus SDR, and I love that, and yada, yada, yada. I think I'll sell this. And it sold in 20 seconds when I put it online, and I truly regret selling that radio. So you started your company, Sherwood Engineering. What was kind of your focus? I know you started out with some of the Drake line modifications, and you have a relationship with the Drake line like I sort of do with that NRD 545.
It was really a fluke that Sherwood Engineering became into existence because we'll call my business partner, K8RRH, George, who still lives in Cincinnati area, and we purchased the Drake R4C and started using it in 160-meter CW contests. And even though the reviews were good and the limited number of testing of it looked fine in a CW contest, it fell apart. So at that point, I said, well, let's see if I can fix it. So that started this cottage industry that started with Drake and then, of course, expanded, as you said, to NRD and some ICOM products. So it was like, I own the radio, it doesn't work. There must be some way to make it work properly. And so that started it.
Somehow that reminds me of maintaining a sports car over a period of time. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I've been a Corvette owner for, 35 years. So I guess so.
What model do you have?
Well, I've got a 92 yellow Corvette that's manual, 6-speed manual shift.
Well, in the Colorado mountains, that's got to be a great kind of touring vehicle.
One time we were going up Boulder Falls to see the Aspen change, and it broke down, and I had no cell phone coverage, but I had a 2-meter rig in the Corvette, believe it or not, and I called Mayday, Mayday, and someone rescued me and had a tow truck sent out.
Wow, ham radio wins again. That kind of affinity for if it's broke, let's fix it, kind of has led into what you've done with the Drake line, and people who love the Drake R4 series, whereby some of the things that you built a filter that's no longer in production. Tell us a little bit about that filter that you created for the Drake R4.
Well, in effect, I invented the roofing filter, even though we didn't call it a roofing filter. So the R4C had an 8kC roofing filter that when we use today's term, and that's why it had an overload problem if you had a lot of stations in that 8 kilohertz. So I said, well, what if I put in a 600 hertz filter and have it switchable and instead of the 8 kilohertz when you're on CW? Of course, it was a CW problem, not a sideband problem. And so that was the first product that really modified the receiver. I did have also 125 hertz filter that plugged in the back, but that was just an accessory like any of the other Drake filters. So that was the major improvement. It increased the dynamic range about 25 dB when measured close in. And then that resulted in my first published article in Ham Radio Magazine, which I wish we had Ham Radio Magazine still around today.
That particular filter is a prized auction item on eBay. If one comes up, I've noticed that there tends to be a lot of bidders, and they are prized possessions. For our listeners who ask questions like, what's that third quarter interception that he keeps talking about? And what is dynamic range? Explain some of those to our listeners who may not kind of be as engineering savvy. What's dynamic range? Why should they care? And what's the third order intercept?
Okay, well, dynamic range was defined by both QST and Ham Radio Magazine in 1975. And before that, we had sensitivity and selectivity, and that's about it. So it was defined that you would feed in 2 signals into a radio, and at that point in 1975, in subsequent years, they only did it at a 20 kC spacing. So you would have 2 signal generators at 20 kilohertz apart, and then you'd increase the signals, those 2 signals going into the radio, and look for the third order distortion product. I mean, we have third order distortion in audio amplifiers and preamplifiers and receivers and all that. So a third order distortion product is what it's all about. So if you measure the noise floor of the receiver, which is something like sensitivity, and then you measure how strong a signal has to be injected, this pair of signals into the radio to produce a third order distortion product equal to the noise floor. That's how dynamic range was defined, and it's still defined that way today, but you can do it at different signal spacings, and that's what I really brought to the equation. Was 20 kilohertz may have worked if you had an HRO 60 or a receiver, or maybe even a 75A4. But it didn't work once the roofing filters started being in existence that we now call up conversion radios or things like that. So the problem was a radio might test great with the 20 kC spacing test, but when you put it at 2 kilohertz, which I started publishing there about 1975, maybe not 76, then it might just crater and go from a big number to a small number. So that's the practical side of it. Now, third order intercept is the theoretical number. I don't actually publish that. It's an extrapolation of the distortion products, and I just like to talk about dynamic range as opposed to distortion, the third order. And then if you talk about direct sampling radios, which are now the rage, it's meaningless in a direct sampling radio. So third order IP shouldn't even be discussed with the newest radios that are direct sampling.
Well, thank you for that exposition. For our non-American listeners, that little joke about third quarter interception for third order intercept, that's an American football thing, that if you watch American football, you might intercept a forward pass, and generally if you do that in the third quarter, it's a bad thing. We're talking with Rob Sherwood, November Charlie 0 Bravo. Rob, listening to you and hearing about what you've done, and also taking note of your QRZ page, you have just a super contest station just east of you in Alt, Colorado. Do you think your background in chasing DX and contesting gave you a practical approach to some of these engineering concepts that you helped create and promote?
Well, the bottom line is, does the test in the laboratory equate with what happens on the air? So my contest station's been around now about 13 years, and that was, to me, the biggest improvement in what I could offer the community on evaluating products was, the table that's now on the web, and of course back in the 70s was printed in a flyer way before the internet. That was a laboratory type measurement, but when you go into a contest, and particularly CW contesting, there's a lot involved with evaluating receivers. So I enjoy making a sort of stream of consciousness comments on what I noted using virtually all the radios that have come out in the last 15, 20 years in a contest environment. And you got ergonomics involved and noise reduction and selectivity and just how well the radio really works besides the numbers that say it should work or it shouldn't.
You've been to Hamfest and you talk to a lot of ham groups, and my observation, you'll have at least two groups of hams, those that pay attention to, if you will, engineering lab test numbers and try to figure out what that means for them when they're searching for something. Then those who sort of punt and say, I don't know what all that gobbledygook means. I just know my rig works. And what I hear you talking about is how to take those two perspectives and put them together. The radio might work great on various metrics in a lab, but how does it perform, if you will, in the field? How does that help the amateur radio operator? I think that crosses a bridge that helps the kind of the non-technically driven ham make consumer decisions.
Well, we have to be sure that we don't get obsessed with the laboratory numbers beyond reason. So I've said maybe several years, like I've had the pleasure of speaking at Contest University the day before the Dayton Hamvention for now like 12 years in a row, maybe it's 13. And my chart, as you now can find on the internet, shows over 100 transceivers. And what we shouldn't say is I should only own the one at the top. And that is kind of crazy because we now have an amazing selection of radios that perform very well in most environments. So it's nice to be able to weed out the ones that you probably should mark off your list. But in the most recent presentation I just made within the last month over the internet was that, and also at Contest University, there's about 12.5 radios that we should all be completely happy using in a contest environment, working DX, D-expeditions, or just rag chewing, of course. So we've got a lot of choices today of fine radios, and it's astounding how the improvement in receivers have happened over the last approximately 10 or 11 years since like the K3 came out, and that's 2008. So there's a lot of choices. Price ranges from $1,000 to stratospheric, $12,000 or more. So we really have a lot of choices today that we can all enjoy.
To a statistician, when you see numbers and rankings, you immediately think, okay, some of the differences in a given column of numbers appears to be small, but you look at the variation. And so what I'm hearing you say is that while there might be measured differences among similar ranks, some of those differences aren't meaningfully that different. That is, this particular group where the numbers are similar are all very, very good.
Right, and you can sort of set a minimum, and you might choose your own minimum and say, well, everything that is this good or better, I'm going to consider. And I've had people call up on the phone and say, well, or maybe by email and say, well, I've got a radio and it's on your list and it's 95 dB, the way you've sorted this set of radios, close in dynamic range, and should I sell my 95 dB radio and buy a 100 dB radio? Well, that's probably not appropriate. Now, you might choose to do that, but at the same time, if you've got a radio that performs really well for most people most of the time, you should be completely happy with it. And then the thing is, do you enjoy running your radio? I've said I could have a radio that maybe was top on the list, but I didn't have fun running it. So that's not a good radio for me.
Well, that's a very balanced perspective. Let me follow on with that. I think most hams have heard of the Sherwood tables. Many hams have perused them. Some use it as sort of the holy grail to go shopping with. And I think you've given perhaps some do's and don'ts as far as the use of those. Let me ask you a question that's very contemporary. If you remember back, Dick Clark used to have an American Bandstand show out of Philadelphia. Very often a record would come in with a bullet. Boom, it went to number one quickly. And you have recently had something like that with a Yaesu rig. Now, the ICQ podcast got a Yaesu United Kingdom preview of that, and we had a nice little video segment on that. So we gave an early view of the FTD 101, but that jumped into your tables right at number one, as I recall. Does that happen very often?
Well, not too often. I mean, most radios that are really relatively modern, like in the last 5 years, they're kind of 100 dB radios, and my goodness, if we go back to the 70s, if we could have a 100 dB radio and none existed then that would be phenomenal. So now we have the case where this new 101D from Yaesu jumped up to 110. So that's just amazing. But that shouldn't negate someone who owns a K3 that's measured at 105 or an ICOM that measured at 100 or 99 or something like that. So we shouldn't get obsessed, but it is great to see the fact that the OEMs, through competition and to some extent by me highlighting the dynamic range differences over all these decades, that receiver performance is just really shot off the chart. But let me make another note that I'm going to be giving a presentation here soon, and it's going to be emphasizing, okay, the receivers are now excellent if we look at our choices of approximately 18 that I would say are really a good group to pick from, that now we need to start improving transmitters, because actually transmitters from the standpoint of sideband splatter have gotten worse. The cleanest transmitter I've ever owned was a Collins 32S3, and its memory strikes me, you can't buy that anymore.
Well, you can't buy it from Collins.
That's true.
Well, Rob, one of the things that people like you who kind of get their own stuff, they do their own testing, they develop their own methods, they lay those out there, and they give that very educated opinion. And people have certainly flocked to the Sherwood tables. Now, the ARRL is probably the other game in town, if you will, on bench testing. And one of the things that I have appreciated over the years is that Rob Sherwood and the ARRL lab have had a very friendly professional relationship. There's no sniping. There's no, they don't do it right, he doesn't do it right. No, you guys really complement one another, even though you may approach some measurements a little bit differently. Now, they have a lab manual that they put out, and having gotten to know Bob Allison in particular, he has tremendous respect for you and what you do. Could you just illuminate for our listeners maybe what, from your view, what are some approaches that you do a little bit differently, perhaps, not necessarily better or worse, but just that you do a little bit differently than what the ARRL test manual does?
Well, Bob and I get along very well. We've had dinner together several times. I got to say hello at the Dayton Hamvention, although he was rather busy this year. If you go back a while ago, well, decades ago, really, I pushed the league towards testing beyond the 20 kc dynamic range test. And the league has stated that I think it occurred at some meeting before Dayton one year, where because I did find that the testing needed to be a bit refined, that a 20 kc test was no longer valid for radios that were currently in production. So I've pushed them along, and they've come along, and we now, of course, do the tests very similarly. There have been times when I've disagreed because synthesized radios came along, and that, of course, was great. We didn't have drift anymore. We had digital readouts, but the early synthesizers were pretty noisy, and this really was the limit on transceiver testing performance because of what we call phase noise limited, or now the league defined the term reciprocal mixing dynamic range, and that is now in every review, and you'll see your little color graphics with the little arrows, and it's in the table, of course. So we came together on the significance of phase noise. The most recent thing that's we're sort of fine-tuning between the league's testing is transmit composite noise, because like I've said, the receivers are now so good, but transmitters have their limit, and the one piece of test equipment that the league has only tests phase noise. It doesn't test amplitude noise. And really, if we're at field day, this is a big deal, transmitted noise. So we kind of work together, and sometimes I kind of push them along. But Bob Allison and I just really enjoy that kindred spirit of trying to make the products better, and if we can lead the way, great.
And I think it helps that on the personal side, both you and Bob are just kind of nice guys. You know, you'd have to work to not like either one of you in terms of personality. So those kinds of things, I don't know, you call it competition, maybe competition in ideas, helps us all, because more than one view and that kind of thing is just the way science works. I certainly know that. We're talking with Rob Sherwood, November Charlie 0 Bravo, creator of the famous Sherwood tables. Let me ask you, what's your workbench like? Tell the ham who might be interested in amping up their workbench game, what would be some of the pieces of test equipment that you found very useful for hams? As you probably well know, a lot of the HP, Tektronix, Fluke, and other bench equipment that came out during the 80s is now available at rock bottom prices, and if it still works just as good as it did then, it still works just as now as as it did then. What would be your recommendations for amateur radio listeners?
Well, my lab is a little specialized because I have to be able to test the absolute state-of-the-art transceivers, and most hams wouldn't spend the type of money that's required to do that. But I think every ham should have an oscilloscope, and they should have a signal generator. So otherwise, you're kind of shooting blind if the receiver doesn't seem to be working quite right, or you're not even sure if it's working right. So my laboratory is full of HP equipment, nothing that's new enough to be Agilent except a voltmeter, and then of course Keysight after that. And then all my scopes are oscilloscopes are Tektronix, the mainframe oscilloscopes where you can plug in a time base and a vertical amplifier. So most of my stuff's getting old like I am, but like you say, you can afford to buy it today.
Right. I've been doing some of that. Now, there is a lot of new stuff that's come. Some of it's out of China. Some of it's out of just homebrew shops that people will design things, and they may not be up to lab quality standards, but they put something in the hands of a ham for very little money. And there's a danger in that, in the sense that you can be fooled by poor measurement, but it at least gets hams into the measurement business. And I find it like that old phrase, gateway drug. Even a cheap type of device that at least gets you into measuring may get you into better measuring.
Well, certainly you'll see that at the Dayton Hamvention, some of the test equipment from overseas that's really quite good, and for the money it's just amazing. And of course the big change in oscilloscopes is digital, and those type of fine details of making measurements with these digital scopes is amazing.
We are looking forward to your forthcoming presentation on transmission quality and things like that. You have a glossary of terms that you explain what's in your tables, because I know you have been asked what's that mean more times than, as they used to say, Carter has liver pills back in our day. I think that's just a great document, and you're up to now revision F on that. But what would you recommend for the rag chewer versus the contester DXer to think about?
Well, we really have to understand that my 2 kilohertz dynamic range table column, which is how that website is sorted. I mean, you could sort it by sensitivity, which today would be sort of crazy because radios are plenty sensitive. So I sorted it by close-in dynamic range because that's where the radios had the enormous difference, particularly once the upconversion radios came out, like maybe the TR7 was the first, and of course the ICOM 756 Pro line that came out, and all the upconversion radios. So for the CW pilot guy, whether it's de-expedition, contester, just a DX station you're trying to work, and there's 27 stations calling at the same time, that was the key. Now for the sideband rag chewer, it's really not much of an issue, because what is the limit if we're just trying to work a weak station, whether it's in a contest or not, and there's a strong station on sideband 3 to 5 kilohertz away? The receiver is not the limit. It's the transmitted intermod products, the splatter, that occurs. So really for the rag chewer, you've got a wide open selection, because pick something you like, something you can afford, something maybe you want a band scope. I want a band scope, but if you're just going to rag chew, maybe you don't even need that. So like a TS590S, wonderful little radio now available on the used market for like $700. So it's really the CW pilot where the dynamic range is really a significant reason to make that choice. And then now we've got the digital world with FT8, and now that's kind of the same type of thing, that you've got a staggering number of stations in 2.5 kilohertz. So that's, in a way, the same type of problem that the CW pilot operator has to deal with. If you've got 100 FT8 stations in that narrow a bandwidth, and for some reason, even though we started initially thinking of ST8 as a weak signal only and low power, people are running a kilowatt on FT8, so we've got big signals on there.
Rob, let me ask you a little different question here. Proverbially speaking, when you wake up in the morning, what are you thinking about?
Well, it's 72. I'm happy to wake up in the morning. Well, after I have breakfast and with my wife, is look at my email, because it's amazing here after all these years. I get emails from people saying, I always wanted an R4C, for instance, and I couldn't afford it. I want to know if I can buy your kits. People ask questions about, well, for instance, they're asking me, how does the new K4 test? I'm thinking, wait a minute, it hasn't even shipped yet. Or of course the FTDX 101D came out, and it was shown at Dayton over a year ago, and people asked me, well, how is that radio perform? And I say, I haven't even seen one. So I got to see one in April of this year. So really the first thing after your basic get up and going is I go to the my email and see who's sending emails to me and asking questions.
Well, I suspect that you've learned a lot from the questions. I know as a professor, I would always learn as much from the students, but what they ask is what I was lecturing on. And I suspect that's helped shape kind of where you go in terms of thinking about problems.
Well, I just gave a presentation to the UK on Saturday via the internet, of course. And at the end of the presentation, I said, well, I want some feedback to you guys. This was a 6-meter barbecue type of group, kind of like there used to be one in Austin, Texas. And they were talking about VHF, UHF. And so a gentleman from Scotland said, well, I'm using this new ICOM transceiver that I also own, and I'm in Colorado in a rather non-difficult RF environment. We don't have thousands of people on 2 meters all at the same time, like you do back in the East or in Europe. So he was giving me his feedback on operating on 2 meters and 70 centimeters from Scotland. So that's always fun to get feedback from other active amateurs who are using state-of-the-art equipment and finding out, how did it work for him?
Well, and it's just a real blessing to the amateur community that you participate in interviews such as the one we're doing now, and as well as many others. That's for sure, because I think it's that interchange that's important. Let me go to something that you've touched on. What did SDRs and the design do for your measurement approach? Did that kind of shift some things as far as how you've mentioned that some metrics just aren't, with direct sampling, just aren't relevant anymore, for example?
All right. Well, the first thing is I'd like to be more precise, and unfortunately this is sort of an issue. SDR simply means software defined radios, but all our radios today have amazing amount of software in it. It isn't just the ones we run with the computer. And you mentioned the Perseus. When I own a Perseus and use it as a laboratory measurement, it's amazing fast Fourier transform piece of equipment, a direct sampling radio. But if we use the generic term SDR meaning a direct sampling, well, two things come up. That third order intercept number is meaningless because there is no such thing as extrapolating the distortion product. So we just have to forget about that. Most of the direct sampling radios are about 100 dB radio, and that's perfectly fine. But the big difference is they don't have a roofing filter that every radio today has that's a legacy radio, or even the hybrids. The TS890S is a hybrid, and the FTDX101D is a hybrid. What do I mean by that? It's a superhet radio, down conversion, but its display, its band scope, its waterfall is direct sampling, which makes the display much more detailed than what we would have had like on a Pro 3 or an ICOM 781 or a TS990S, for instance. So most of the radios do behave fairly similarly to a legacy radio from the signal in versus distortion out standpoint, but not every one of them. So it's harder to give just one number. And if you look at my website, you'll see on several of the newest radios that are direct sampling, there is a second sample. In other words, I tested one and then I tested a completely different one, and there's more scatter in the data. It's not all over the map, but there's more difference because just the individual analog to digital converter chip has variations. So one might be 104 and the other's 97. Now, you shouldn't be going crazy over that difference. It's insignificant. So the newer radios are, it's not quite as cut and dried from testing, and it's not quite as consistent from sample to sample. Not all over the map, but several dB difference.
Here's a hardball question. Does money buy performance?
It buys features, but right now you can buy a brand new ICOM 7300 for $1,000, and you can buy its sister product, the ICOM 7851, for $12,000. They're both wonderful radios. Now, the flagship radio, of course, has features that the little 7300 doesn't have, but you can work a lot of DX with that. At the same time, you can go to the used market because the 7300 crashed the used market. Because if you can buy a wonderful little radio for $1,000, why buy a used radio? So you can get great products now for $500, $600, $700. So regardless of your budget, you can buy a great radio today, new or used.
Rob, what's something that from your experience that you would advise rank and file hams that they should learn to become better consumers of a transceiver?
I'm going to rank what I consider most important as what's going to make you work more, have the ability to work more DX. Well, you've got location, and that's a tough one because you probably aren't going to move, but you might consider that. You've got your antennas. As you mentioned, I have a contest station. You can see some pictures on QRZ.com. You've got operator skill, and we all can hone our operator skill. I need to work more CW because I only do about 6 contests a year on CW. And then you've got your radio choice. So I would say for most people, they'll call up and say, what new radio should I buy? Or here's what I own. And I'll say, what's your antenna? And maybe it's a 20-foot long vertical in the backyard. And maybe that's all they can put up because of an HOA or other limitations. Antenna, antenna, antenna. Put your emphasis there. If you're saying, what's the biggest improvement from a marginal improvement in my ability to work DX or to work whatever it is I'm trying to work, is put your money at the antenna as the number one choice.
How do you get your rigs into test? Do you buy them? Are they loaned or some version of both?
Well, considering there's over 100 on there, most of them I've never owned. Luckily, back in the old days, CW Electronics in Denver, which is now owned by HRO, I mean, they bought the company years ago. Alan Applegate let me borrow rigs that were in, because their used market was much more vibrant back in those old days. You could go into your local ham store and there would be a lot of used stuff, and Alan would let me borrow it. So a lot of radios I borrowed that way. Hams loaned me radios, like for instance, the 101D, and Ham in New York loaned it to me for a month. Now, part of that time I went back to California for an update. There was in effect a recall because I found a problem with it, others found problems with it, and so Yaesu did a recall, and everything, even in dealer stock, went back to California. Individuals could send it in at no cost, shipping included. They covered that, so they did a good job of taking care of the customer. So I borrow radios. One thing I'm not doing much of anymore, though, is taking any radios direct from the manufacturer, unless it's a random sample. Like, for instance, Kenwood lets me walk into Ham Radio Outlet in Denver and pick a box off the shelf. You know, like they got maybe 5 in stock, and I just pick a random one. So I don't want to have a situation where a radio could be cherry picked. So pretty much it's either loaned by hams, some I own, of course, and many if maybe a local ham. I borrowed a Flex from a ham at my ham club because there was a new model out that I hadn't tested. So it's varied, but what I don't want to have happen is I like the random sample approach, whether one I bought or borrowed or whatever.
It's what Professor Deming helped Ford reconstruct itself through quality control sampling, and it's that random sampling at that end that makes all the difference in the world. Well, I wanted our listeners to get a sense of how you acquired that, because there's always this suspicion of favoritism. From my own 2 cents, I've gotten to know, been around you a little bit, and at least enough to watch you and see what you do, as well as the ARRL lab. And often the ARRLs criticize, well, yeah, you take advertising, so you don't come out with a bad review on something. But I find that the folks that doing those tests, that nothing further could be from the truth, that you do what you do, you have an approach to it, you generally disclose what you do, and with preventing any kind of cherry picking, it is what it is as you finish your test. So I wanted to ask, how you did that acquisition, because sometimes hams are like other conspiracy theorists. They kind of have an idea that something's rigged. I just haven't seen any indication from Sherwood or ARRL that there's anything like that whatsoever.
Well, I'm sure Bob is very careful to make measurements there at the lab in Newington. And from my standpoint, never anyone has paid me to make any type of a measurement for the ham radio stuff. I've done some commercial testing for like Harman Kardon or something like that, receivers But in the amateur world, it's all just volunteer. There's nothing more important to me than the integrity, that what I produce in a test is completely above board. If I make a mistake, there'll be a couple places on my table where it said updated such and such a date or something like that, because I made an error. And of course, as soon as I'd find that or someone would point it out, that would be corrected. So the data is as transparent as I can make it.
Absolutely. And that error correction is just normal engineering work. Things happen, but it's certainly not by design. Rob, what do you see? You're 72. You've had a great career. You said you're sort of semi-retired. You know that we're not going to let you stop producing those Sherwood tables. What do you see your future being involved with?
Right. Well, the Sherwood products that I sell will probably be wrapped up by the end of the year or relatively soon into next year. My engineer that actually produces our little kits for the Drake, which, it's amazing, what radio that came out in the 70s, people are still modifying it. That I never could have guessed that 20 years ago. But my technician's 82, I'm 72, so we're winding that down. But I can plan to continue testing and updating the website. I've got my dream station out there in the country, east of Fort Collins, Colorado, with 6 towers and 9 HF Yagis. They're all monoband. So I kind of go crazy on antennas. I mentioned antennas. So even though the Sherwood Engineering side of producing an aftermarket product is about at the end of the line, the testing and giving presentations, it's an honor to be invited to a Hamfest. I just gave a Hamfest in Slidell, Louisiana just a few weeks ago. They flew me down there. My wife and I went together. We got to enjoy New Orleans. And it's just an honor to have ham organizations invite me to come in person or to do it over the internet like we're doing today.
Well, Rob, I met you in person, even though I had done a business transaction with you. I met you in Huntsville a few years ago, and you gave just a superb presentation. So it's a great delight that you have that orientation, that you make yourself available, continue to teach and to educate. And we wish you many, many more years of success. I'll end with this. Another hardball question. In your list, in your tables, if you could just say, all right, I'm starting from scratch, what's the one rig you would pick out of that?
Well, that varies over time. I mean,
today.
Well, I happen to own ICOM in Kenwood, so I can't say a favorite because everyone has its strengths and weaknesses. There is no perfect radio. There'll never be a perfect radio that you would say, well, wonder why they did that. I've tried to run almost all the new radios in the last 15 years in the contest station, and so I could get a hands-on approach. And so I happen to be old school, probably because I'm 72 and started out with a radio that my dad bought me before I got my novice license in 1961 that had knobs on it. So I just happen to like knobbed radios. But we've got the, you called SDR and I just call the direct sampling that run off a computer. That's a totally different way to do things. It's got capabilities of remote control that can also be done with the knob radio. So I don't have a favorite radio, but I happen to be a knob radio fan. So that's just my preference.
I'll recondition your answer, and there's not a single perfect radio, and so what you choose to optimize, as we've discussed over this interview, depends on the ham. It depends on what you want to be important.
Absolutely. Well, I've ended a couple of contest university presentations saying at the end of the day, whether you were operating in a contest or a rag shoe or whatever it was, hopefully you enjoyed using your radio. And if you don't enjoy using a radio, then get something else. And what I may find important could be of no significance to someone else. I'm a real stickler on really clean receive audio. I don't like distortion or hiss or that type of thing. So that's something that's important to me. Someone else might not even notice it. So we all have different focuses. Ergonomics are important to me, that it needs to be easy to use. And of course, we don't want our radio to break, and the factory service is important, and all sorts of things are important, and they're going to vary from operator to operator.
Rob, thank you for being here with us today, and our listeners for the ICQ podcast will greatly enjoy this because, as I mentioned at the outset, you're one of our most requested interview subjects. You have certainly made your mark in amateur radio and shortwave listening, and we thank you for giving us the time.
Well, thank you for the honor of being a guest. I appreciate it.
7-3, Rob.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Well, thanks to Frank, K4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, for his interview there with Rob Sherwood from Sherwood Engineering, and certainly a very interesting chat you had with him there, Frank. So thanks a lot for doing that for us. Well, mailbag in this episode here, and we start with a mail from friend and donor to the show, Malcolm Heath, Kilo Sierra Zero Tango, formerly Kilo India 7 Zulu Sierra X-Ray. And his message says, hi there, just listen to the most recent podcast where the Belgian-Flemish broadcaster VRT's apology for naming radio amateurs as being behind, in speech marks, the transmission of false traffic information to vehicle dashboard screens was discussed. I agreed with most of the discussion, but was about to dash off an angry email to you when the DEF CON conference was mentioned until Bill chimed in to set the record straight. As a long-time DEF CON attendee of 20 years and volunteered at the Ham Radio Village there this year, in fact, the entire reason I'm now a radio amateur was because I ran into a friend at DEF CON who encouraged me to get licensed. Without her and the general spirit of communication, cooperation, experimentation and curiosity that is at the core of the hacker culture, it's very unlikely I would have ever gotten into this amazing hobby at all. In Malcolm's opinion, the hacker and maker communities are absolutely the communities that should be encouraged to get into the hobby. They hear far too often that ham radio is dying, with hand wringing about how no younger people are picking up the torch as the old timers become silent keys. Let me tell you, the interest I saw from hackers from all over the world at Ham Radio Village this year tells a different story. Hacker is a strange word. It certainly is, actually. That says something. I tell you, the amount of times my kids use it in terms of anything that relates to doing something just out of the ordinary of anything technology. You are certainly correct there, Malcolm. Hacker is certainly a strange word. Certainly there are people, perhaps some licensed amateurs, who do illegal things with their understanding, but the vast majority of 20,000 plus people who attend DEF CON every year are not criminals, just as the vast majority of licensed amateurs are not. Some hackers are serious security researchers who are advanced in the art and science of technology in general, and security in particular. Others are professionals working in the information security world. Many more are tinkers, homebrewers, and just interested people who have a great curiosity about technology, including radio. To paint them with the same brush and those using knowledge for a criminal purpose is unfair, and thanks again for Bill for making the point. So that's from Malcolm, Kilo Sierra Zero Tango. I certainly concur with a lot of what he says there, Dad. I mean, obviously I work in the IT industry here in Ireland, and I would certainly agree with what he says about the so-called hacker community, for want of a better term, usually out for the better good. I'm actually quite interested in what he's saying here about this ham radio village, because the Maker Faire attachment to ham radio in Friedrichshafen seems to have run aground, and I'd be quite interested to know a bit more about this ham radio village and how that's working there at this event, and see if that could be used in other events, say, around the world.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting, Colin. And I do actually agree with Malcolm. The thing, Malcolm, was that got us very annoyed was the comment that the broadcaster made that literally amateur radio people were criminals, and that really threw the cat amongst the pigeons as far as I was concerned. However, Bill was talking about DEF CON and what you guys have done there, and I have no problems with that. We use technology for the good of technology, and most amateurs I've met are honourable people. There are obviously going to be one or two, but for the broadcaster to say that we were pretty much a bunch of criminals really hit home at me a little bit. So that's where I was going. So agree with you, Malcolm. Keep up the good work, and thanks for being a listener.
Yeah, certainly so. Ed Durant, DD5 Lima Papa, who will be with us in our next full episode, he dropped a mail to tell us about how he received a nice mail from Peter, Golf Zero Oscar India Kilo. And so it was following one of Ed's SOTA activations. And he got in touch with him and just wanted to basically pass on best wishes to the ICQ team. And Ed wishes Peter well in his SOTA activation. And obviously, of course, thank you, Peter, for listening to the show. So great for you to get in contact there and pass on your positive views of the shows to Ed. And certainly Ed is our man for SOTA. He's very, very big into the SOTA, meets lots of people, and seems to be very well known in the SOTA world. So certainly if you've got any thoughts, series, questions, or you hear of Ed on a SOTA activation, say hi to him, and say he always loves to hear from listeners, say to it from the show. So thanks a lot there, Ed, for passing on Peter's generous good wishes. And Dad, you've been working someone on DMR recently.
Yeah, well, I was chatting with Adrian M0GLJ the other day, and he'd escaped the missus, I think, because he was on Lanzarote, and he called me up on my hotspot for a quick natter. And at the end of it, Danny, 2M0XDE, called me, and Danny had a nice chat. He said, was I M1MRB from the podcast? And I went, well, guilty as charged. So we had a bit of a chat. He passed on wishes to all the presenters. He thoroughly enjoys the show. And, good news to everybody. He's a long-term listener, so we thank him, and he's looking for many more episodes from us. So there you go, Colin.
Well, we're certainly knocking them out at the moment, aren't we? I think this is, I think we're about on a weekly schedule at the moment with the amount of content we have at the moment. So I hope you continue to enjoy the show, Danny. Well, as I say, you mentioned about the amount of content we're producing at the moment. It does obviously raise costs, etc. And for that, we'd like to thank again our donors this episode: Neil Connor, Mike 6 Charlie Uniform Echo, Frank Westpole, Kilo 6 Foxtrot Whiskey, and Charles Riley Golf Vor Juliet Quebec X-Ray for donating to the show. Those are our monthly and subscription donors. They keep us advert free and make sure we're not punting mattresses, pillows, dog food, meat boxes, and God knows what else that podcasts sell you. So certainly consider, showing the value you find in the show, and visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate and send whatever you think the show's worth to us, either with a one-off donation or set up one of our subscription plans to help us out. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ICQ podcast. There'll be videos going up soon around the end of the month from UK Hamfest, so make sure you're on the subscription channels there to make sure you can see those videos there. Keep update to us on our Twitter handles at M1MRB and at Colin Butler, and obviously there's the Facebook group if you wish to get involved using Facebook. I'd like to thank our contributors on the round table with you this episode, Dad, and that's Leslie, Golf 0, Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, Matthew, Mike 0, November Juliet X-Ray, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6, November Uniform, and Ruth, Kilo Mike 4, Lima Alpha Oscar. So thanks a lot for getting involved, guys. Right, okay, just running through the things, make sure I've got everything all ticked off here, and everything's all done and in the bag, apart from the very important job of getting the kettle on and making Mrs. B a cup of tea.
Yeah, we'll certainly do that, Colin. And she's getting close to retirement, and she's saying, you won't have to do it much longer. I think it's another year at least, though. But, yeah, I will be making Mrs. B a cup of tea, finding her a chocolate biscuit when she comes in probably about the next 20 minutes or so. So, yeah, that'll be good, Colin.
Fantastic. Well, guys, as I say, we've actually got a show coming up next week. We've got another one of our companion shows as we work through some of the content we have at the moment. And then after that is UK Hamfest at the end of the month. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys there. So until next time, I wish you all 73s and continue to enjoy the hobby. 73s all.
Yeah, 73.